All right, good morning, all. Anyone who joins beyond this point, they'll be okay. Thanks for joining today. We know it's rather hard to find time in our oddly busy schedules between Zoom, Teams, WebEx calls, and yes, of course, webinars. We'll try not to bore you today with the traditional approach of what webinars can be. I think it should be fun. Today, I'm pleased to bring together two great minds in the world of Citrix and end user computing to talk about one of the most common challenges in Citrix environments, poor logon experience. We've all been there, and if not, or if you haven't, one day you will. I am Matthew Metelsky. I'm the CEO of Third Octet, and once upon a time in a land far, far away, I spent time designing and building Citrix environments. And I like to think I still contribute to some of Ed and his team's successes, but perhaps Ed is just placating my need to feel like I'm still technical. Nonetheless, as CEO, I'm responsible for creating positive experiences internally amongst our staff and externally with our current and future clients. Whether that's building proper environments to foster growth and prosperity or understanding business demands and market trends, I thoroughly enjoy my role as CEO as it provides a great vehicle to make positive differences in people's lives. And at Third Octet, we certainly have a unique messaging, right, and go-to-market strategy. My philosophy aligns exactly to Third Octet's. We really believe businesses that are built on happy, engaged, and collaborative employees, right, employees who are able to focus on high value and deeply meaningful work, are the most successful. Our solutions focus on removing physical place and technology as a barrier to productivity and engagement. And that allows employees to work when, where, and however they choose. That minimizes their time to productive and allows them to personally define their own work-life balance. This is essentially how we better the world through technology. But when we talk about work-life balance, it's not only specific to end users, we must also factor our impacts to IT professionals. And how can we simplify their daily life to drive greater and broader joy in their responsibilities? Our solutions are not only measured in how simple they can be to consume, but also how simple they are to implement and support. This approach is really reflected in how we choose our partnerships and of course the technologies in which we invest in with everything we have. Citrix is pivotal to work-life balance, especially in light of global events. Prior, we talked a lot about the future of work, right? And that future work is here already. As IT professionals, we're forced to accommodate an entirely remote workforce. And now more than ever, it is extremely important that the systems in which we depend on are providing a positive user experience. We, again, as IT professionals, must minimize the volume of tech-related stressors on our employees as best we can. And this is entirely possible with many of the native tools you have available in your Citrix portfolio, if done right. So today, as part of our Workspace Craft series, our agenda will walk through the Citrix logon process, discuss really where user experience on logon falls short, and the typical challenges and gaps that cause poor logon times. Following that, we'll run through a few options you have available to better design profile management. Of course, if you have questions at any time, drop them in the chat. I may interrupt the guys with questions as I see them, but we'll be sure to reserve some time at the end to address. So without further ado, let's meet our hosts. As our Director of Professional Services, Ed Mathewson leads our industry-leading architects and engineers. Ed and team have really designed and implemented Citrix across every vertical, every company side, and hold over 100 technical certifications across Citrix, Microsoft, and of course related technology stacks. Ed is one of the most humble guys I know, but he's spent over 25 years involved in Citrix and end user computing. And as a former Citrix certified instructor, Ed is an integral mentor and leader at Third Octet. Of course, joining Ed is our esteemed colleague from Citrix, Paolo Catalano. Paolo's experience runs deep, not only from his current tenureship at Citrix, but through a history of Citrix experience in the Canadian channel. We work extremely closely with Paolo across a vast majority of clients and collaborate regularly to ensure Citrix and Third Octet are in lockstep. Awesome part, these two guys used to work together back in the day. And today we're bringing them together for the Ed and Paolo show. So let's get on with it. So how many of you have said, never judge a book by its cover, yet you still do? Well, unfortunately, a poor logon experience is the cover, and our users judge that cover. Citrix is slow, quote unquote. And yesterday we had another webinar with ControlUp on that very topic and how ControlUp can help expedite identification and resolution of these types of challenges. That webinar is on demand, and I highly recommend a watch. It's on our website, thirdoctet.com. And at the end, there's a complimentary proof of concept that I'm willing to offer to everyone in this call today. Anyhow, I digress. Ed, Paolo, generally, Citrix administrators do not understand everything that happens during the logon process. Ed, why don't we start there and walk our guests through what exactly happens? Let me just pass it over to Ed here.
Right. I think I have control. Good morning, folks. Ed Mathewson here. I'm not nearly as eloquent a speaker as Matthew is, but I'll do my best and see if we can get you through this process. So I'm going to go through the login process from two different places, both browser-based, but one from a simulation outside the organization and one from a simulation inside the organization. So we'll go through what the user sees, and then we'll back it up a little bit and talk a little bit about what happens behind the scenes, just so you can see the parts that are moving and where there might be challenges. So I hope my screen is visible. Matt or Paolo, can you confirm that?
Oh yeah, Firefox, we see you.
We're good? All right. Yeah. So this is an external simulation. I'm just gonna click on a shortcut because users typically have shortcuts. And we get to a default login screen on a NetScaler, which is a fairly common configuration. And this is a very simple Active Directory user ID login. Now, in many cases, that might have two-factor authentication. There might be a token code here. In some more complicated environments, we may be using N-factor, where we put in username password here, and then we go to a second factor screen. But let's just go through the very simple process and see what happens. User puts in credentials, clicks on log on. All things being equal, they see their applications. They click on a link. Don't worry about this popping up. I have that popping up on purpose. And I'll show you why a little later. The Citrix Workspace app launches, and depending on how efficient our logon process is, usually sometime between 10 and 30 seconds later, we see an application. Typical user logon process.
Mm-hmm.
There we go. We got an application.
And that wasn't too bad at all, the length of time there to get onto that application.
Somewhat surprising in my underpowered lab environment. That's good. That's a successful login. We're fairly happy with that. So what had to happen behind the scenes for that to happen? Well, if we break it down, I'm going to log this off and go back to the login screen. First piece. This is, I misspoke when I called it a NetScaler. It's a Citrix ADC running Citrix Gateway. This is a device that is typically going to be placed in your DMZ. Not always, but typically in your DMZ. So first of all, user provides credentials here. Your Citrix ADC is configured to communicate with your domain controllers. So if we're having a problem at this point, user can't log in here, then we're going to look at the Citrix ADC configuration and potentially communication between it and the domain controllers. Go ahead and log in. As soon as we get past that login, then what's happening is our Citrix ADC is then talking to our storefront servers. Now, again, depending on your environment, you may have one or more storefront servers. Typically, we have a minimum of 2 so that there's no single point of failure. So when we deploy it, we do some additional configuration to help us when it comes to troubleshooting. So you may or may not have noticed in the bottom of my browser here, I have an indication of the server name that I'm connecting to. And that's because there is a load balance storefront farm in behind here. So if there's a problem with a user, it's going to help me from an administrative perspective troubleshooting if I can tell which storefront server it's connecting to. So this list here comes from your storefront server on account of the fact that we successfully logged into our Citrix ADC and it bridged through to that. Now, when we actually click on a link to run an application, you'll notice I have a pop-up here. Now, if I was to check off, do this automatically for files like this from now on, I'm never going to see that again, and I'm just going to have it launch. I wanted you to see this so that you can see that on the back end, there's actually a file generated. It's a .ica file. That .ica file is essentially all the connection information that the client needs to connect into our environment, be it through our Citrix gateway running on our ADC or directly into our virtual delivery agent. And that's a very important piece. That file is actually generated by your storefront server. So from a troubleshooting perspective, if we're having trouble and we don't see that file, we click on a link and we get an error, that tells us right away, well, we know a number of things. One, because we got to the screen with the applications on it, our authentication at the Citrix ADC was successful. Our application enumeration through the storefront server was successful, which means the storefront server is successfully talking to our delivery controllers and getting our list of applications. When we click on an application, if we get an error there, that tells us right away that the storefront server, for whatever reason, and there are a number of reasons, was unable to generate the ICA file. So from a troubleshooting perspective, what we're going to do at that point, based on where we are, is go to our storefront server to troubleshoot that. Now, in my case, I actually got the ICA file and I successfully connected. In the event of an error, where you want to go, and I can see that the storefront server I'm on is S2CTXINF. I happen to have an RDP session open to that. On that storefront server, there is a storefront specific event log. So if there was an error with the user generating that file, you'll come in here and you will see an error in here, and it'll give you a pretty good indication of what the problem is. Now, if I get the ICA file, that's all good. Then the client launches and there's a problem there. That's another reason why I wanted you to see this file come up, because what I'll do is save this file. And then I will go and open it up. So for us as technical people, this gives us a very easy way to troubleshoot what could be wrong. We see where it's trying to connect to. So maybe we have a resolution problem. There may be a problem with a ticket. Whatever, we have that file there to help us troubleshoot on the client side. In our case, everything's working. So let me flip over to a device that's inside the environment. And I've set the browser up to appear essentially the same, because this is how we set it up in most environments as well, so that from a user perspective, it looks the same whether they're outside or inside. The biggest difference here is, and I've left the default configuration here, we're actually connecting directly to the storefront. So typical configuration, and again, some environments are deployed differently, and there are a number of reasons why you might want to do things differently. But in this case, we're connecting directly to the storefront, which is typical. Our external, we connected to our Citrix ADC, running the Citrix Gateway service, but internally, we typically connect directly to the storefront server. Other than that, it looks fairly similar. Again, we have, it's hitting a load balance BIP on our Citrix ADC, so we have an indication at the bottom of our storefront page as to which server we're connecting to. From a user perspective, everything looks the same. Again, this is Chrome, so it looks a little bit different when that pops up, but that tells us that we got the ICA file. Now the client goes and connects in, runs the application. This is a different user ID, probably connecting to a different server. And we're up and running.
And Ed, that's a pretty handy tip. I've done that for customers as well, where we put the little banner at the bottom, which server you're connecting to, especially if you're load balancing storefront.
Exactly.
Yeah, and you do that in the web.config file, I guess, just in case anyone wants to know how you do that. Or how would you typically add that banner to the bottom by modifying?
I typically do that. I'll just quickly show you where we do that. I might quickly show you. In this case, this is a little bit of code that is done in the custom folder. Excuse me. This is our demo here. There is a custom folder and there's a JavaScript file in here. So it was done in here. There are a number of ways to do it. I typically do it in here, and then it shows up both in the browser and the workspace app.
Nice.
It's just a little bit of code that gets fired off. Just this stuff down here.
Beauty.
And we typically do that in all of our deployments. Make sense?
Perfect.
Thanks, Paolo. Okay, so that's very simple logon process, what we're going through. Again, to assist you as an administrator when you're trying to troubleshoot, the event log on your storefront server is the first place you go if users aren't getting connected typically. After that, Director is your friend. All kinds of information that we can get from Director. You notice I have some user connection failures here from some earlier troubleshooting. I'm just going to go back and connect one from outside. So user 1 is connecting from external, and user 2 here, I'll have user 2 connect from internal.
Well, that was a nice touch. I will say that it launched our corporate website. Thank you for that.
Yeah, that wasn't an accident. Okay, I don't know if I got anything connected from the outside. That's still inside. Oh, I still had it on safe. So we'll get this connected. I'll just quickly show you what pieces of Director can help us for troubleshooting stuff like this, and then we'll flip it back to Matt for the next piece. Okay, so now I have 2 sessions. When I go into Director here, and this by default updates once a minute. Eventually this will update to 2. If you're not familiar with Director, you should get familiar with Director. Anywhere in Director you see something that's blue, that's a link that you can drill in on. So I'm going to drill in on the connection, and you can see when it actually gets into the connections, there are 2 there. So user 1 was our external user. We get in there and we have all our handy stuff that we can do, log the user off, shadow, reset the profile. We see the applications. What I really want you to see is the details tab, because this gives us all kinds of information about our user situation. And if we look in the session details pane, we can find out all kinds of stuff that is important to us from troubleshooting connectivity. 1, protocol here, UDP. So that tells us right away that this is an EDT enabled session, because if it's not EDT enabled, that protocol is going to be TCP.
So there's a new acronym. I'm familiar with it, but what is EDT, Ed?
Enlightened Data Transport. That's it's a feature that Citrix has developed over the last few years that makes the protocol really smart, and it will automatically flip back and forth as required between TCP and UDP depending on network conditions. UDP, because of the lack of session overhead, is quicker, but it's UDP because it's unreliable. So the reliability has to be built into the protocol. If we can run UDP, it is much quicker for the protocol. If there are a network situation that causes the UDP to be having excessive retries, then it'll flip back to TCP.
So I think that's really important because, you know, user experience, once we get past logon, sometimes we tend to forget about it. Users connected, great, it'll be fine. But the important switch or the adaptability of the Citrix protocol really ensures that the user experience remains positive throughout the session. Is that correct?
100%. And that's a big advantage that Citrix has over some of the other players, in that their protocol is significantly more refined and developed over the years.
So Director, I love Director. It's probably one of the greatest, you know, enhancements Citrix has made to their portfolio in quite some time. And this is not only just a great tool that administrators can use, this is also a great tool that, you know, service desk, operational individuals can use to support users, right? To troubleshoot issues within the session.
Absolutely. And the wealth of information here is unbelievable. Having said that, you need to be able to interpret what this stuff is telling you. So some of the stuff's pretty clear. ICA latency of 0 milliseconds, that's a pretty good number. ICA round trip time, 3 milliseconds, that's a pretty good number. Now, this is in a lab environment, so I'm not too surprised by that. In your live environment where an external user would actually be coming over the internet, you're not going to see 3 millisecond round trip time. Here's some important stuff for us from a troubleshooting perspective. Launched via, and here I can see the storefront server. So launched via is going to be the storefront server that generated the information for the client to connect. Connected via is an indication of the route the client connection is taking. And in this case, it's coming through a NetScaler, which makes sense because, as we said, our user 1 is connecting from the outside. And we can find out all kinds of different information about that as well. If we look at the smart access filters, we can tell what gateway on the NetScaler is coming through, because in some complicated environments, you may have more than one gateway defined. and session policies that are applied to it there. All of that is detail stuff that will help you in troubleshooting further down the road. If we scroll down a little bit, we get some really good information for user experience. Logon duration, 22 seconds for this, and a breakdown of the components that make up that 22 seconds. Scrolling down, if you're up to date on version, we get an even greater breakdown of the session startup time. Client side, and the workspace app session startup, and then the VDA session side. So very detailed information breaking down all of the steps along that logon process. In this particular case, I have user 1 configured to use the next part of our discussion. We're going to talk about user experience, profile management. In this case, this user is using Citrix roaming profile, and I get all kinds of information about that profile here, as well as the ability to reset it as an administrator if I need to. And then finally, scrolling down to the very bottom, if you've deployed Citrix Application Delivery Management and your user connection is actually coming through a NetScaler, then you can get a breakdown of data representing network performance of that connection. Now, I'm going to switch here very quickly, and this is a typical thing a help desk person will do in Director. I want to go to user 2 session, and we'll compare and contrast that. Again, on the details tab, scroll back to the top, and again, I can see it's using UDP, so it's Enlightened Data Transport. My launch via is another storefront server. My connected via, and this is very important to recognize if I'm looking for why a user's session performance may be bad. In this case, it's coming directly from the client to the VDA. And I can tell that if I don't have reverse lookup configured in my DNS, I may just see the IP address. I can see that that's the same as the endpoint IP, so, which tells me no NetScaler in place.
Right. So there was a question about just the difference between launched via and connected via. So launched via identifies the storefront server in which the ICA file was generated from. Connected via either notes it's a direct connection from the client where it will say the endpoint IP, or it's connecting through a NetScaler. Is that correct?
100% correct.
Okay. Thank you.
And that's very important. That's a great question, because it's very important when we're looking at trying to figure out, hey, what's going on with this particular user, whether the client acting directly to the VDA or through a NetScaler tells us where we need to look if we're looking at a network problem. So if we're seeing, say, round trip time of 600 milliseconds, and we see that the client is connected directly, then I'm going to bet that they're either over a WAN connection or through a VPN connection, and we can start looking there.
And this is a popular question. It just came up twice, as a matter of fact, and I'm going to ask Paolo this. Is there EDT support currently available with Citrix Cloud and Gateway Service?
As of now, there isn't. You would need a gateway on-prem to enable EDT. That's on the roadmap, and it's going to be released fairly soon, from what I understand, because I know that's something a lot of customers are looking for that are using the gateway service. So as of now, it's not available, but it will be, put it that way.
Okay,
so,
thank you.
No problem.
This group has great questions.
Yeah, so far so good.
Yes. So again, scrolling down, I can see logon process for this one, 14 seconds, a breakdown. In this case, user 2 is actually using another profile management mechanism that we're going to talk about in a bit, and that is FSLogix. So there's no integration with Director for the FSLogix. I don't get to do anything with that here. And of course, there's no network information for this particular session because this connection is not going through the NetScaler.
But there is potential to actually capture that information if a user is not using gateway. Is that correct?
The network information?
Yeah.
Not that I'm aware of.
No. Okay.
Yeah, because that's HDX insights coming from the ADC or ADM from the ADC. So that's why it's all gateway connections, basically.
I'm just, that was my own question. I was just curious.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it is a great question and a good segue. In many cases, we will deploy internal connections through Citrix ADC, Citrix Gateway, so that we can get that HDX insight information. I'll give you an example. I won't mention the name to protect the innocent. We have an environment where there's a very extensive WAN network, over 200 WAN. So in order to help us monitor and know where we might be having issues, every single connection that comes in goes through a Citrix ADC, Citrix Gateway, so that we can see. And one of the key things that we see from that, and I'll have to switch back to the other user for that. One of the key things you see from the HDX insight is not just the numbers, but you see a separation, and again, not with UDP, you see a separation between WAN and DC latency. So what that tells you is if it's WAN latency, then that's connectivity between the client and the gateway. If it's DC latency, that's connectivity between the gateway and your VDA. So it very quickly tells you where you need to look for that issue. Okay, I'll throw it back to you, Matt, to get us on to our next section, unless there are outstanding questions there.
Yeah, there is actually one question, and this is really, how do you resolve a user logon issue? I'm just going to paraphrase it a bit. For perhaps the logon issue is limited to one user, every other user is fine. So I know from history that one of the common areas was you get to NetScaler, ADC gateway, and log in. Everyone else is connected, but you can't connect. So is there any pointers in really isolating an issue for a single user, perhaps from log on through to the end?
Yeah, and Paolo, you can jump in anytime. I'm doing a lot of talking here, but typically, if it's a great question, because when a user calls a help desk, say they can't log in, if I'm sitting on the help desk, the first thing I'm going to check is to see if other users can log in. Because if other users can log in, then it's probably not a systemic configuration issue, meaning it's probably narrower than that, meaning it's probably something with the user configuration itself or on that user's particular client. Yeah. So from there, you're gonna go down a path where, okay, I have quick, as an IT support person, I have typically quick and ready access to their account configuration. So I'll check on their account. Is it locked out? Is it not in a group that it needs to be in to be authenticated? All kinds of things you can check there. If all of that stuff checks out, then I would go down and start looking at client-specific stuff. For instance, see if that user can log in from a separate client.
And even where are they connecting from, right? Is it different from other users? Are they connecting from an internal WAN connection like you mentioned before? Are they coming from the internet? That's where the gateway insights come into play to kind of pinpoint and say, it might be something with the user's local ISP or internet. So it could be related to what their connection might be. They might be having some challenges getting connected.
Right.
Yeah.
So we could likely spend, well, there's there's a lot of material in training courses which cover really this whole process. We can't necessarily boil it all down to an hour window, but you know, it was great insight. Director is one of the most powerful tool sets that you can use. It's natively available in Citrix. I think it was introduced in what, Paolo 7.x?
7x, yeah, early 7x.
And
FMA.
Yeah, they continue to introduce new capabilities and new features to Director. For example, you know, I think about a year ago, they really highlighted the logon process to break down between profile load, brokering, group policy applications, stuff like that. And
interactive session, yeah.
So, you know, based on that, I think it's safe to assume we know some areas where user experience falls short. But it generally boils down to two things, right? You cannot log in, or you can log in, but the experience is very poor. You know, Ed and Paolo, can you walk us through really some of the variables that can create these two situations?
Sure. From a client not being able to log in perspective, that could be an example like I just mentioned before with if you're talking about an individual user, there may be something related to their internet connection that could be preventing them from connecting and logging in if they're a remote user or work from home user. Connectivity kind of goes along the same lines there, whether they're connecting internally or externally. If it's a systemic condition, like Ed mentioned as well, if there's a bunch of users that are located at a particular office and all of them are having challenges connecting and not being able to log in, then we know there could be something related to that particular location or office where users are having challenges. And then from an authentication perspective, whether or not their user accounts are locked out, whether or not they can log in, and something may be happening on Active Directory side where they might need to have their account re-enabled or password reset or what have you, because they may have entered the wrong password several times. And then from the brokering side, I guess this is related to more the resources on the server side or the management and resources plane, where there could be communication issues with the delivery controllers or something where the VDAs are not able to register successfully, and brokering of that session to the VDAs from the end user is interrupted somehow. So that could also affect people not being able to log in. So
yeah, and I think you know, you can't log in. There's a lot of areas to check there. If we can log in, and I purposely highlighted profile management in red and bold, because that's where I think a lot of problems happen with user experience. One, you log in the first time, it's fantastic, and over time, really profiles start to fall apart. You know, 9 times out of 10, I would say we suggest profile management as a typical break in user experience. And as the platform ages, new applications are introduced, the profiles become bloated. Well, can we walk through a bit about the history of profile management and perhaps what options everyone has available now?
Let's do it.
I'm going to just break it out so we see it all at once.
Sure. So early days, local profiles, awesome user experience, great all around if you only have one server. As soon as you get into an environment where you have more than one server, local profiles aren't going to cut it anymore. Biggest reason being we have more than one server for a number of reasons. We have too many users to go on one server, and for high availability. If our profiles are local, then that's user data on a specific server. The next time they connect, they're probably going to connect to a different server. Over time, they'll end up with a local profile on each server, but it's what I call the bits and bytes experience of profiles. Every connection's a new experience.
Yeah,
because they have different settings.
Yeah.
Exactly. So then enter Microsoft roaming profiles, which is the same profile, only it's kept in a central storage location and copied to the server locally at logon. And then the reverse of that, copied back to that central store on log off. Number of issues with that. Last write wins from a change perspective, meaning if a user ends up with a session on 3 different servers and makes changes that hit the profile, the first 2 sessions that log off, their changes get overwritten by the last session because they're all saving to the same place. Amongst other challenges, common issue that happens with Microsoft roaming profiles is the profile just gets corrupt. So corrupt profile results in typically one of 2 scenarios. Either the user can't log in at all, or their applications won't run. And jump in anytime, Paolo, if you have additions.
Yeah, and it's super slow because it's loading it via GPOs really to load a Microsoft roaming profile. It has to load the entire profile before users can actually interact with the session, and that makes the login process even slower. Whereas with like profile management, it kind of adds chunks as the user's logging in, so they have quicker interactive session time and they're able to use the application or the desktop that they're connecting to. So Microsoft roaming profiles in itself is very inefficient, and like you said, the chances of profile corruption or even profile bloating are very high, and there's not too many granular settings that you can set as far as like excluding certain things that aren't required to be synchronized to the central store. So that's definitely would advise against using Microsoft roaming profiles if you're deploying that.
So now we come really to the 2 choices we have today. There's others, but highlighting today is one, hybrid profiles, right, where it's a granular control of what profiles do and do not, streaming of profile elements as needed. That's Citrix Profile Manager. And then secondarily, which is a product from Microsoft that they acquired last year before, is containerized profiles through FSLogix. So I want to be sure we spend some time on really identifying the 2 key profile management strategies that people could use today. One that is natively available, and 2, one that you may be entitled to use. So what is Citrix Profile Manager? Guys?
Paolo's on a roll, so take that one away, Paolo.
So what is User Profile Manager or User Profile Management? It's basically our product that integrates with virtual apps and desktops. Hybrid profile solution, roaming profiles located in a central store. When a user logs in, their profile is copied from that central store, and you can configure things like profile streaming to allow, again, that interactive session to launch a lot more quicker and have the user, connected to their session much quicker. It's been around for many years, and we just keep innovating and enhancing it. Even with our latest version, we have more integration with FSLogix, if you will, from a containerized profile perspective, and integrating both solutions into one. So pros, smaller profile sizes, possible through optimization. So when you're configuring profile management, if you leave things default when you enable it, that really increases the chances of having that profile bloat and having a huge profile size. But by optimizing the profile management settings and doing things like enabling folder redirection for the desktop and documents alongside of profile management, or potentially using FSLogix for that purpose, will allow the profile size to be small, and when the user logs in, no matter which server they're connecting to, it's going to be a good, fast experience. Multi-session handling capabilities, profile reset, process integrated with Director. That's something that Ed showed just now, that within Director, we have the capability of resetting the profile. So that's great, and that's direct integration with the product itself. Some of the cons, relatively complex to configure. If you don't know what you're doing, you might not do things properly, or if you do things with the default configuration, you might have a not so optimized experience. And as you add more applications to the environment, the ongoing administrative effort could be significantly high depending on your environment. Again, Office 365 introduces complexity. So that's where we're talking about, potentially integrating both solutions together, because we've enabled something with the latest version of user profile management, containerized Outlook cache and Windows search, but support is limited. So that's kind of the con. There's no native solution for the OneDrive for Business native client. So where that data is stored, there's no native solution within UPM. And again, replication of profiles to other locations requires additional tools, and whether or not replicating and making it resilient from an active deployment, that can be challenging as well from a support standpoint, even from Microsoft, like how to enable multi-data center profile replication and actively using those profiles. So that can be very challenging in itself from a high availability business continuity standpoint, and having those profiles roam from location to location, if you will. Ed, I don't know if you want to chime in there as well, but
yeah, I think the Office 365 is the biggest challenge that everyone will be dealing with. So there's massive uptick in Office 365 over the past few years, and especially in the past few months with the Teams proliferation and whatnot. Now that's really exposing people. So managing profiles that are dependent on Office 365, especially email, OST data, OneDrive synchronization, and now, of course, with Teams and the integration with OneDrive. So what is FSLogix?
Okay, I'll handle that one. As it says here, it's a containerized solution, which what that translates to for us is it's a VHD or a VHDX. And essentially what happens is as part of the login process, the FSLogix client mounts a VHD remotely over the network. So the VHD stays in the central storage location. It's mounted as a drive, and a file system junction is put in so that for all intents and purposes, the session runs like it would normally run, but the profile is actually on that VHD. It's included in any of the scenarios where we'll be deploying Citrix. So it's included with RDS, it's included on the desktop OS, etc. There are a number of components to it. You can deploy just the O365 container. So we can use Citrix UPM for the rest of the profile and have all the O365 stuff put in this VHD. Or we can put the entire profile into this VHD. Essentially works the same. There are some challenges with deploying FSLogix where users might have multiple sessions.
Mm-hmm.
So we got some pros here, vendor's own solution. So Microsoft supports it, which is very good, since the profile really is a Windows piece and is challenging to support. So having support from Microsoft is valuable for that. Seamless integration with the apps and the operating system. The apps don't know anything about it, really. Simple to configure and less ongoing administrative effort. It is all GPO configured. There's a template, group policy object template that you put in. There aren't even that many settings to look at. Better user experience, especially for O365 workloads. It's quick to log on because it's really just a mount. It's quick to log off because all that happens behind the scenes. It has a built-in profile copying mechanism to a cloud cache, which has to be configured. Always some downsides, less control over exclusions resulting in larger profiles. That's 100%. And one of the big pieces of the profile is always going to be your Outlook cache. No integration with Director for profile reset. So as you saw in Director, there's really just nothing shows up there for a profile because Director doesn't know anything about the FSLogix profile and wouldn't really be able to do anything with it. Multi-session handling is more complex. And the reason for that is it's a VHD. Only one session can mount that VHD read-write. So there is a scenario where you can configure it for multiple sessions, but only the first session actually can write to the profile. Subsequent sessions are read-only.
And
Now,
I want to just interject, Ed, because I know I want to continue the Ed and Paolo show for the foreseeable future. And the multi-session handling, you know, to have the best of both worlds, really, what I want to talk about is how do you implement CPM with FSLogix to really cover multi-session handling, yet also get O365 and all that massive amount of data outside of CPM and managed by a container. So don't talk about it much yet, because we want to talk about that in greater detail in a future Ed and Paolo show. So I know we're running short on time. We've got about 9 minutes left, and I wanted to give something to the audience. You know, we don't have any t-shirts, I'm sorry, or Yeti mugs, but we have some best practices that you can do immediately to improve Logon. So 3 recommendations, because it's proven scientifically that if you give someone more than 3 things to recommend, which unfortunately we have, you'll forget a few. So what are the 3 recommendations we could provide to the audience of things they could do today after they get off this webinar to improve Logon?
Recommendation number 1, always minimize. Keep it simple. If it doesn't need to be there, get rid of it. So, and this really goes into Citrix UPM, etc., where we can configure at a very granular level what's in, what's out. So if we don't absolutely need it, it's out.
There was a question. There was a question also. You know, can you just reset a user profile or copy the profile from another user? That you can, yes, absolutely. That's the Band-Aid, though. If you find yourself routinely resetting profiles, you're putting a Band-Aid on the situation. It'll continue to come back. Do yourself a favor. Figure out the problem. Let that one user suffer for a little bit to understand why you need to reset that profile. Fix it such that this doesn't become a widespread problem. Now you're dealing with everyone's profiles, because fundamentally you can't reset everyone's profiles all the time. That's such an impact to user experience. So avoid the Band-Aids.
And one common issue I've seen for having to reset profiles is the permissions on the NTFS and share permissions are not set correctly. Like even like customers, I've seen customers having it implemented incorrectly and having to go through these pain processes of having to reset the user profiles. And that's one place to check if you're at a basic level, if the permissions are set properly. Yeah.
So, and also this WEM, Workspace Environment Manager, a little known tool, NorScale, that not a lot of people are aware of, but it has such a profound impact to user experience, right, guys?
Big impact moving GPOs into WEM.
Yeah.
Eliminate the GPO, put the configuration in WEM.
Exactly. Even for UPM or Citrix Profile Management, you can configure all those settings in WEM now, and WEM is more efficient at applying policies than it is than GPOs are. So from that perspective, transferring all your settings from GPOs to WEM for your VDAs specifically will definitely increase performance. Even memory and CPU optimization within WEM can help significantly with your VDAs, even from a multi-user session perspective. That helps to streamline and improve user login experience as well. I've seen it in environments where by default with it turned off, user logins were about 30 seconds, and then just by turning on 2 checkboxes, it reduced it to like 10 to 15 seconds. So that's something definitely worth exploring, I would say.
So, and the second recommendation here is really around Office 365. If you're not necessarily in Office 365, you're using Exchange on premises, this probably doesn't apply to you, but really it's containerizing the OST and OneDrive data with FSLogix. This is not something you can necessarily go and implement today. I would recommend, as part of this recommendation, is speaking with Ed or Paolo or watching for our future event around this to start containerizing those data repositories and pulling it outside of the user profile. Recommendation 3 is actually 3. So it should be 5 recommendations. Citrix Director versions. Also, if you're not running a LTSR or 7.x for that matter, engage with us to really look at upgrading your environment, because that will unlock the functionality of Workspace Environment Manager, Citrix Director, all these great tools to help you ensure user experience remains positive for the future. Performance analytics, this is sad. I really wanted Paolo to give you a demonstration of what performance analytics is, which is a component of Citrix Cloud, which gives you user experience scoring. So perhaps in version 3 of the Ed and Paolo show, we do a deeper dive on performance analytics. I think
maybe like a full deep dive in Citrix analytics as a whole, right? Because there's also security analytics and operations analytics, and just to see what you can get out of all 3 might be valuable to go through for sure. So
I agree. And then our other partner, ControlUp, which makes a great solution for monitoring Citrix. It really expands out the capabilities of what's provided in Director and ADM and stuff like that. But they also have a free tool, Logon Simulator. So this is a tool that you can use to actually get a detailed breakdown of what's going on in the logon and test things and repeat a login without you actually having to do it. So good metrics to define your own KPI and determine your own improvement. However, ControlUp also just introduced Scout Bees. If you go to scoutbees.io, it is also a login simulator, but it's a logon simulator that actually runs through a simulated user experience process and does so repeatedly, internally, externally, using their hives, and then we'll report back to you deviations. So a good method to have another person on the team that can just continuously run logons to the environment, and if there's deviations from the norm, alert back to you. It is 10:58. Sadly, we'll miss the performance analytics. We also did have a few Q&A I had not got a chance to address. I will take those and personally respond to each of you with those responses. I did want to respect everyone's time because, Ed and Paolo and myself, we have the gift of the gab. We like to talk, but I want to respect everyone's time. So I want to thank you all for joining today, especially thank you, Ed and Paolo. Great insights. I want to keep this going, and I think we'd have some good attendance on these future topics. Be sure to check out our future events, visiting our website, thirdoctet.com, or following us on Twitter @thirdoctet, or even LinkedIn. Thank you again. Have a great day. Stay well, everyone. We're supposed to get some rain in Southern Ontario today and a chilly weekend, but hopefully we can bring some great weather for next week. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Bye-bye.